So I know I'm standing between you guys and your coffee, so I'll be as quick as I can. So I'm Matt Gould. I'm one of the directors of Lushai, which is a user experience consultancy. I'm in Auckland, but we were actually founded in Wellington, and we're still in Wellington. So we're founded by Lulu Pachow, who's out there somewhere, local UX legend. But we're not talking about Lushai now. We're actually talking about UX Gym. Where do I point this thing? Which is another business Lulu and I have, which does UX training. I can just use this if it's going to be. Okay, that's cool. I like to hide behind this anyway. And particularly, we're going to talk about what we've learned through a particular training course we do through UX Gym. So UX Gym does user experience training courses. And we have one particular course called UX Crash Course, where we have seen hundreds of people experience a user-centered design process for the first time. So just to kind of set it up, the UX Crash Course, it's a 6-hour course. It's super intense. And actually, who here has done one of our courses? I've seen a few people. Yeah, that's really nice to see. If you see yourself in any of these photos, I know us New Zealanders, we don't like to shout out. Maybe you could do like a clap like that or something, because some of you, I'm sure, will be in here. So the UX Crash Course, it's 6 hours long, and you do a full user-centered design process. It's kind of based on the Service Design Jam format, if you've ever done that, where it's very hands-on. You go, do user research, you do analysis, you do synthesis, you come up with an idea, and you design and prototype that idea. It's paper-based. We don't do any coding in this particular course, not because there's no value in doing that coding, but it's just a constriction of the time frame we do it in. And it's the great thing about this as a learning experience for us is that we have a really wide variety of people doing it, more than any of our other courses. So we have designers that want to upskill or cross-skill. We have product managers. We have developers. We have business owners. We have BAs. We have a really wide variety of people. So we see a wide variety of people going through a really intense experience. And this particular course we do a lot. So we do it about 3 or 4 times a year minimum, once in each city ourselves. We do it through some training partners where we'll do it over a couple of days. And we also do it privately. So we've done it for some private companies, some government departments, even other design agencies. So what we get to see is the same thing again and again and again and again. And obviously you start to see patterns. And almost regardless of who these people are going through, we do see certain behaviors emerge. Some things that work really well and some things that lead to tragic failure. So what I'm going to do today is talk about, it's a short time period, so I'm going to talk about one of the big things that we've noticed and a couple of really solid takeaways for those of you that might be branching into maybe a different area of UX. So if you're a researcher who's about to do some design, or you're a designer who's about to get into a more human-facing part of the process, you can see what really trips up some of our students and hopefully learn from their mistakes. So this is the first thing that we've discovered. So still no one knows what UX is, which is kind of interesting for us because we have these conversations before about the ubiquity of the term UX. We see all these job listings for user experience people. Every agency has user experience on their website, and all of our, we all know what it is. But in our course, so we're an organization called UX Gym. We do a course called UX Crash Course, so even to get on our course, you've had to go through the phrase twice. But still, when we actually get to the course, there's a really wide variety of expectations about what user experience is going to be. The two big ones we see are the classic UX as UI, and we'll particularly get this from developers who will express frustration about 3 hours into the course that they've been here for half a day and they haven't drawn a single select box. So there's an expectation that we're going to be doing lots of actual big D design, and we do that, but we also do all of the supporting activities. Another one is that people think it's design thinking. So in almost every course we'll get some kind of senior practitioner who didn't read the outline very closely and thinks they're going to do a design thinking course. And that's interesting in itself because we see recurring patterns with those guys where overall, if we get a senior person in the course, remember those soft skills we were talking about yesterday? They raise the performance of everyone else in that course just through their ability to communicate and bring people on board and facilitate. But we'll also sometimes see a reluctance for them to get their hands dirty in little details because they're a little bit worried about their status. So we're all trying to get our seat on the big person table, and because of this this thing we're afraid of, where everyone thinks UX is just UI, we see some of our senior guys are afraid to do any UI because they're worried that that's going to reinforce that and it's going to affect their status and affect their ability to be heard, and they want to communicate things. So I'm going to crack straight into the lessons you can take away with you. So this is for the actual human-facing part of things. So when we talk about user research and user testing, our students have no problems at all with the process and the methods and the principles. They understand that really well, and they usually take that on board really easily. But this is the thing that actually trips them up. So what we'll see is this. We'll do user testing at the end of the day, and they'll discuss with their team what they are going to test, so what the weaknesses are and what instructions they're going to give their users. And we have little scripts we give them with all the standard stuff that you guys know about thinking out loud, and we're not testing you, we're testing the designs. And then they sit down with the person, and they and they are, and they fumble, and they forget to ask people to think aloud, and then they forget to read their own questions. And it's kind of incredible because they have an idea in their head of how it's going to go down, and they might scribble it on a bit of paper, and it all goes out the window as soon as they get to an actual person. But there's a really good reason for this, and it's because research is really hard. So this is where they end up. A great idea of how great this test is going to be, and then it's just it's an excruciatingly painful experience to watch. So when you're faced with another person, that's an interpersonal experience, and that's for some of us, it's actually quite an anxious thing. But for everybody, that requires a lot of concentration and a lot of your mental energy, so we funnel in. Our ability to do other things, like check our script, for example, completely goes out the window. So the level of preparedness our students think they have before they go in doesn't equate to how prepared they actually are when they're in the process. Even when we give them really specific scripts, or we help them to write a specific script, the script often, the first time they do it, sits on the table next to them, and the panic of an interpersonal interaction isn't actually looked at. So what we see is they miss out questions, or they word their questions so differently each time that we can't compare the results afterwards. So for you guys that are maybe going to do your first experience of facing real customers or real users when you do your research, if our experience is anything to go by, this is probably the most useful thing that you can do. So first of all, write a script. We always ask our students to write a script, and there's a strange resistance for a lot of them to actually write it down. And by write a script, I mean like a script of everything. So hello, my name is blah, 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 blah. I'm saying this sort of reflecting on the fact that actually I wrote a script for this and I'm not following it at all, because in the panic of being up on the stage, I've kind of thrown it out the window. So let's not think too closely about that. So yeah, so we really try and encourage people to write down exactly what they're going to say at every point. And this is a really important thing, and the really hard thing is read the script, particularly if you haven't done it many times before. 2 or 3 times in, after your second or third interview or test, it gets a bit easier, but your first one's always kind of a calibration exercise. So I think you may feel that it's a bit awkward to be reading from something as you interact with someone, but however awkward that is, the fact that you're going to hit all of your marks and that you're going to say things that are coherent, you're going to get much more usable results at the end of the day from actually reading what you write. So I mean, it sounds obvious and it feels obvious, but we just see it again and again and again that these are the things that trip people up, not the complexity of the process or understanding the principles or not understanding the method properly. So here's another takeaway for you. Who draws wins? It's my favorite slide. So basically what we see is that people who draw, so people who get their abstract idea into their head and articulate that some way into a prototype or a sketch or a user flow, always do better at the end of the day. And by do better, I mean, for the sake of this talk, we'll say that if something goes through a user test and it's usable and it's a good experience, then that's how we'll define do better. So people who make that abstract thing a concrete thing seem to do a lot better, regardless of whether they're a designer or not. And there's lots of reasons why it might be. Part of the reason is that obviously when you think of something in your head, as soon as you start to articulate it, you realize it's not quite what you thought it was going to be. Flaws become kind of obvious straight away. And the sooner you start to articulate it so other people can see it, then the sooner you can respond to that and the sooner you can start to iterate. So if you guys are coming from a user research or maybe some other, or a product management or some other kind of area, and you're about to go into big D design for the first time, you're actually making lots of small decisions. Again, this is what trips up our students, and this is what I've also kind of integrated more into my own practice now from watching our students. So this is what seems to work. So lean towards making things rather than talking about them. So what that means is, as soon as you start to get an idea in your head at the design phase of what the solution might be or what your hypothesis might be, then start to articulate that in some way so it's out of your head. Even if you're not going to show it to someone at this point, that's a really positive habit to get into. So the second one is do it sooner rather than later. The design takes time and it's really hard. So the sooner you do it and the more time you've got to work on it, you really need to. No one snickered. I was sure that at least Bob Metcalf was going to snicker when I put that up. So it's really important that other people get to see your ideas. I don't like other people seeing my ideas. I'm very much from the generation where I like to take an idea and design it, and when I'm confident that it reflects well on me, then I put it out into the world. But the sooner that even your design colleagues get to see what you're doing, then the more feedback you can get, and the sooner that happens in the process, then the quicker you can respond to that. So the last thing I'd say to you guys is throw away most of what you do. So what we see with our students is that the ones that get really good results at the end are the ones that have produced a lot of drawings and a lot of flows and a lot of paper, and then have thrown most of that away. And that's partly just volume. They've spent more time working on it. But it's also because if you go in with the mindset that what you're doing is probably going to be thrown away, then you're a little bit more free to take risks, to try out different things, to propose different ways of doing things. So the students we see, regardless of whether they come from a design background or not, the ones that have this habit of articulating their design in whatever way they're comfortable really early on and letting people see it, and work with the idea that what they're doing is probably not going to be right and are comfortable with that, they tend to get much better results quicker. Okay, there is a caveat to that whole drawing thing. So what we sometimes see is people start to develop an idea really early on in the process, sometimes when the data is still coming in. So in our course, they'll have done these user interviews, and they'll be synthesizing some of the results from those user interviews, and someone will have an idea, and they'll really get emotionally attached to that idea. And then what happens is the data kind of continues to come in, and we continue to understand that even if it sort of challenges that idea, it's a lot harder to let it go. Generally, you've invested a lot of time already thinking about it and figuring out how it's going to be implemented. So what we tell our students to do, and what seems to work for them, and maybe will work for you guys too, is we use what some people call a car park, and we call a brain fart board. So what that means is, in the research phase, if we suddenly get an idea, we don't want to lose that idea. That might be, sometimes those first ideas are our strongest ones, as we write it on a post-it, and we stick it to a wall, and that way it's not lost, but we're not allowed to talk about it until all the data's come in and we've moved on to the design phase. So that one little trick, once we introduced that into the courses, really helped some of our students that were really getting attached to their ideas to sort of control that habit and to stay open. Because a big problem with that kind of thing is, as soon as you are emotionally attached to an idea, you're sort of closing off to other ideas. Okay, this is kind of my last little bit of direct advice to you guys. So yeah, this is the most verbose slide I've ever written. User testing hates you and wants you to die, but only because it loves you and it wants you to be happy. So I'm just going to sit on that for a minute. Take a chance to take a breath and slow down a little bit. So if someone said to me, you can do a course and you can either teach a whole bunch of design principles and give people a chance to practice design, but you couldn't put them through any user testing, or you could do a course where you are going to give people no design principles, but you're going to make them user test your designs, I would actually probably go for the one with user testing in, because what we see is that the experience of user testing has the biggest, that's right, biggest positive impact on the design practices of our students. So when they start out, they don't realize how strong their mental model is and that the user doesn't share that mental model. They don't understand that design's kind of forecasting into the future. We're predicting how someone is going to respond to and interact with our designs. And that's, it's highly speculative, even for the most senior designer. They feel very confident. We'll often hear phrases like, users will know that this icon means that. And we can explain to them a whole bunch of principles. We can talk about system-level consistency and conventions and all that kind of thing. But some things you need to experience. Someone can tell you, and you really need to experience it. So that experience of sitting there and having, your swagger kicked out of you a little bit, seeing someone sit in front of your design and not know what to do, or repeatedly do something that you hadn't expected, is really positive for our students. And when they iterate based on the user testing, not only are the direct lessons that they've learnt from how someone's responded to their design, but they also have a slightly less confidence generally in their design. So they're a little bit more tentative. They'll be a little bit more likely to question themselves. They make them more obvious. They put a lot more effort into communicating. I think generally what they've done is hopefully realize that designs are hypotheses, really. They're not a solution. We've got an idea of what the design is. We've got an idea of how we think people are going to react to it, and how informed that idea is will depend on how much experience we have and how much we know about our users. And realizing that you're just kind of forecasting into the future is a really good attribute to have. So if I was someone who hadn't done a lot of design before and I was about to go into design for the first time, I'd say the best school for design is user testing. If you can get your design out in front of people as soon as possible and see how they respond, the lessons you learn from that seem to kick in and sink in a lot further than reading about design and reading about design principles. So how are we going for time? Have I got time for my big finish? Yeah, okay. So one last thing, which is that, we've got all these principles we talk about conventions, we talk about all of these different interaction design principles. There's one principle that's really common that actually is exponentially more useful for our students. So we give them this one principle, and the quality of their design decisions increases more than you would believe. Does anyone want to take a quick guess about what that is? Silence. No one's wanting to take a punt? Yes. No, but that's a good one, and I'll write that down. No, it's this one here, satisficing. I found the effects this morning in Keynote. So who knows what satisficing is? Can I see a quick show of hands? So satisficing, I'll be real quick, is basically that when people look at your design, they will stop putting mental effort into figuring it out once they have enough information to proceed. So if they're looking at your design and they get to a certain point where they think, I know enough to go forward, they won't look at anything else. So if you have an elegant design solution, they're not going to go through and analyze every single option and pick the best one. They're only going to apply enough effort until they've got enough information to go forward, and then they're going to respond on that. And once our students realize that, and they start designing with that in mind, the results of getting user testing exponentially increase. So that's me. I think it's afternoon tea time now. I didn't never know how to finish these things, but thanks for your time. It's been fun.